Whispers. A sensual bedtime story for adults, presented by Bedtime Stories. Dim the lights, settle in, and let yourself relax completely. And now, let the story begin. The winding lane, overgrown with ferns and wild brambles, finally surrendered to a gravel path that crunched like old bones beneath Ilara's tires. Rain, a soft, insistent whisper at first, had escalated into a drumming symphony against the roof of her vintage Rover, mirroring the anxious beat of her own heart. She squinted through the wipers, the world outside a smear of grey and emerald, until the silhouette of Oakhaven emerged from the mist. It wasn't grand, not in the stately, imposing way of some ancestral homes. Oakhaven was a study in weathered resilience, a stone cottage, ancient and solid, tucked into the curve of a forgotten hill. Its gabled roof sloped gently. A cluster of chimneys promised warmth, and the windows, dark eyes staring out from under thick brows of ivy, seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. This was the place. The place where her great-aunt Evelyn had lived a solitary, eccentric life, and the place Ilara had reluctantly inherited. A sigh escaped her lips, carrying with it a weary blend of dread and fragile hope. She'd come seeking refuge, a quiet corner to mend the frayed edges of her spirit after a particularly brutal year. Her work as a restorer of antique tapestries required focus, a delicate hand, and a calm mind, all commodities that had been in short supply lately. Oakhaven, Evelyn's legacy, was meant to offer that. She parked the car, the engine dying with a final shuddering gasp, leaving only the roar of the wind and the relentless sluice of rain. Stepping out, she was immediately enveloped by the raw embrace of the elements. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, pine needles and something else, something wild and untamed, like the ancient woods that pressed in on all sides. Her coat, though thick, felt inadequate against the sudden chill. The heavy oak door, studded with tarnished iron, was predictably stiff. She wrestled with the key, a monstrous, ornate piece of metal, until the lock finally yielded with a resounding clunk. Pushing it open, she was met not with the musty silence she expected, but with a faint, earthy aroma of wood smoke. Something else. Something warm and distinctly masculine. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way up her spine. "Hello?" Her voice, thin and reedy, seemed to vanish into the gloom of the unlit hallway. No answer. Only the groan of old timbers settling and then the distant rumble of thunder. A prickle of unease tightened her scalp. Evelyn had been notoriously reclusive. Who would be here? She stepped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind her, plunging the hall into near darkness. Her hand fumbled for a light switch, finding a cold brass plate. A faint click, and then, with a hesitant flicker, a single bulb bathed the hall in a weak yellow glow. And then, she saw him. He was standing by the entrance to what looked like the main living room, silhouetted against the deeper warmth of a roaring fire. Tall. Impossibly tall it seemed, and broad-shouldered. He held a length of kindling, his hands dark with soot, and his gaze, when it met hers, was direct and unwavering. It was a gaze that felt like a physical touch, piercing through her exhaustion and the lingering chill. His hair was the color of wet earth, falling in a slightly unruly wave across his forehead. A faint stubble shadowed his jawline, and his eyes, even across the dim hall. She could discern their intensity, a deep, fathomless gray, like a storm-tossed sea. He wore a simple dark jumper that stretched taut across his chest and shoulders, and old worn jeans. There was a raw, elemental quality to him, as if he belonged to the very stones of this house, or the wild woods outside. "You must be Ilara," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. It was a voice that held the subtle cadence of the local accent, yet with an underlying richness that was utterly compelling. She blinked, momentarily speechless. "And you are—" The question hung in the air, tinged with suspicion. He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile, a fleeting curve that softened the rugged angles of his face just enough to be disarming. Reese Kalen. I look after the place. Evelyn mentioned you might be coming. She neglected to mention one. I sent a letter, Ilara managed, her voice still a little breathless. She felt an odd current humming between them, a strange awareness that made her skin prickle. It was unsettling. And she had to admit, strangely captivating. Weeks ago, to Evelyn. Evelyn. She wasn't much for forwarding mail, Rhys replied, his gaze still holding hers. There was a faint amusement in his eyes now, a subtle glint that made her wonder what secrets he might be privy to. Or indeed, checking it at all. Been here since yesterday, have you? The storm rolled in quicker than expected. No. I just arrived, she corrected, a flush rising to her cheeks. She was tired, disheveled, and soaking wet. Not exactly the grand entrance she might have hoped for, had she even considered such a thing. I didn't expect anyone to be here. I was just making sure everything was in order before you arrived, he explained, gesturing vaguely towards the fire. And then the storm hit. Roads are likely impassable by now. You probably just made it. Her heart sank. Trapped. With this man. In a remote cottage. Her initial desire for solitude suddenly felt very far away. And yet, a strange rebellious part of her found the idea intriguing. Right, she said, trying to compose herself. Well, thank you for the fire. It's very welcome. She shivered again, consciously this time, drawing her coat tighter. You're drenched, Rhys observed, his gaze sweeping over her, not in a leering way, but with a quiet appraising intensity that made her feel acutely aware of every damp thread clinging to her skin. There's a cloakroom just there, behind the stairs, and the fire will warm you. I can put on some water for tea if you like. He moved then, a fluid, economical motion that spoke of strength and grace. She watched him, mesmerized, as he crossed the hall to a small dark wooden door tucked beneath the winding staircase. There was a powerful stillness about him, even in motion. Thank you, she managed, her voice a little steadier now. Tea would be wonderful. And perhaps a towel? He paused, glancing back at her over his shoulder, that fleeting, almost smile touching his lips again. Of course. Evelyn kept an abundance of fresh linen. I'll fetch some. While he disappeared up the stairs, his footsteps surprisingly light for such a large man, Alara shed her sodden coat in the small, shadowy cloakroom. The air in the house was cool, carrying the scent of old wood, beeswax, and that persistent, earthy aroma of him. She emerged, feeling slightly less like a drowned rat, and gravitated towards the living room. The fire was indeed magnificent, throwing flickering light onto heavy oak beams and shelves laden with books. Evelyn had been a collector of esoteric texts, and Alara recognized the familiar spines of ancient folklore and herbal remedies. 2 armchairs, upholstered in worn velvet, faced the hearth, inviting warmth and repose. The room felt lived in, and now imbued with a new, masculine presence. Rhys returned, carrying a stack of thick, fluffy towels and a woolen blanket over his arm. Here, he said, offering them to her. Fingers brushed hers as she took the towels, and a jolt, like a tiny electric current, passed between them. Her breath hitched. His eyes, those deep gray eyes, seemed to acknowledge the spark, holding hers for a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. Thank you, she whispered, her voice a little husky. She busied herself drying her hair, the rough texture of the towel a welcome distraction. I'll get the tea, he said, turning towards what she presumed was the kitchen. Make yourself comfortable. It's going to be a long night. She watched him go, then sank into one of the velvet armchairs, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The fire crackled, spitting sparks, and the wind howled outside, a wild, lonely lament. Her body, still thrumming from the unexpected encounter, slowly began to relax in the warmth. The silence, though, was different now. It was no longer the heavy, empty silence of an abandoned house. It was a silence filled with anticipation, with the knowledge of another presence. A presence that had stirred something within her that she hadn't realized was dormant. He returned shortly, balancing a tray with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of shortbread biscuits. Evelyn's emergency rations, he explained, setting the tray on a small table between them. She always had a stash for unexpected visitors, or if the power went out. He settled into the opposite armchair, not quite facing her, but angled so that their knees were almost touching, separated only by the low table. The firelight played across his strong features, highlighting the planes of his cheekbones, the slight curve of his mouth. He looked utterly at home here, as if he were simply another ancient part of Oakhaven. "Thank you," Elara said again, taking a mug. The tea was strong, fragrant with bergamot, and wonderfully hot. She sipped it, letting the warmth spread through her. "So, you're the caretaker?" "Among other things," he replied, taking a slow sip from his own mug, his eyes fixed on the flames. Evelyn was particular about her home. She preferred someone who understood its quirks. "And you did?" He turned his head then, meeting her gaze. "I grew up not far from here. My family has been connected to Oakhaven for generations. My grandfather was the one who helped Evelyn move in. After her husband passed, we've always kept an eye on it." There was a depth to his explanation, a history she couldn't quite grasp, but felt resonating in his voice. "I see," she murmured. "I barely knew Evelyn. My mother's aunt. We met perhaps twice when I was very young. This inheritance was quite a surprise." "She was a fascinating woman," Rhys said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Private, but not unkind. She valued beauty and quiet. I think she'd be pleased you're here." His words, simple as they were, brought an unexpected warmth to Elara's chest. She had felt like an interloper, a stranger in Evelyn's world. To hear that she might be welcome, even by proxy, was comforting. They fell into a comfortable silence then, punctuated by the crackle of the fire and the insistent drumming of the rain. Elara found herself stealing glances at Rhys. The way the firelight caught the subtle flecks of gold in his grey eyes, the strong line of his throat as he swallowed his tea, the effortless power in his hands as he held the ceramic mug. He was undeniably attractive, in a rugged, untamed way that was far removed from the polished men she usually encountered in her professional life. "What brings you to Oakhaven, Elara?" he asked suddenly, breaking the spell. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it felt intimately close in the quiet room. She hesitated, wondering how much to reveal to this man she'd known for barely an hour. "I'm a textile restorer," she began. "I work with antique tapestries. I needed a change of scenery, a place to regroup. The city had become too much." "A quiet place then," he observed, his eyes still on her. "Oakhaven offers that in spades. And the light in the morning through those windows." He gestured towards the large bay window that overlooked the rain-lashed garden. "It's perfect for delicate work. Evelyn used to paint by it." "She painted?" Elara asked, surprised. Evelyn had always seemed so academic, in the few memories she had. "Among other things," Rhys repeated, that hint of a smile returning. "She had many talents she kept hidden. Perhaps you'll discover some of them while you're here." His words carried a subtle suggestion, a tantalizing hint of mystery. It made her wonder about Evelyn, and about Rhys, and about the secrets this old house might hold. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind rattling the window panes with renewed vigor. A branch scraped against the stone wall, a ghostly sound that made Elara jump. "Just the wind," Rhys reassured her, his voice a steady anchor. "These walls have stood for centuries. They'll stand for many more." His calm presence was oddly soothing. She found herself relaxing more deeply into the armchair, the tension that had been a constant companion for months slowly beginning to unravel. The warmth of the fire, the strong tea, the unexpected company, it was all a balm. "Are you staying here then?" she asked a little awkwardly. It felt like a necessary question, given their forced proximity. He met her gaze, and this time there was no amusement, only a quiet directness. "For tonight it seems we have no choice. The lane will be a river by now. And I wouldn't leave you alone in a strange house in this weather. Not with the power flickering like it is." As if on cue, the lights flickered, dimming for a heart-stopping moment before blazing back to full strength. "Oh," she breathed, a mixture of relief and a strange thrill washing over her. Relief that she wouldn't be alone, and a thrill at the intimacy of the situation. Right? Thank you. There are plenty of rooms, he continued, gesturing vaguely upstairs. I'll take the small one at the back. It's usually empty. You should have Evelyn's old room. It's the warmest. You don't have to, she began, feeling a sudden surge of something she couldn't quite name. Concern? Embarrassment? It's no trouble, he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. Consider it part of my caretaker duties. Besides, he added, a spark dancing in his eyes, I've heard the wind whistles rather mournfully through the west gable. You wouldn't want to be alone with that. A laugh, light and genuine, escaped her lips. It felt good, a release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. I suppose not. They talked for a little longer, the conversation flowing more easily now. He told her snippets about the local history, about Evelyn's garden, a neglected riot of color even in winter, and about the wildlife that frequented the surrounding woods. Ilara found herself sharing details about her work, her passion for the intricate stories woven into old fabrics, the quiet satisfaction of bringing something faded back to life. He listened intently, his gaze unwavering, making her feel as though every word she spoke held profound importance. The rain eventually softened to a steady drizzle, but the wind continued its mournful song. The fire began to dwindle, casting longer, more dramatic shadows across the room. The air grew cooler, and a comfortable weariness settled over Ilara. It's getting late, Rhys said, rising from his chair with a fluidity that belied his size. I'll show you to your room. There are fresh sheets and I aired it out this morning. She stood too, feeling a slight tremor in her legs, a combination of exhaustion and the lingering awareness of him. Thank you, Rhys, for everything. I truly appreciate it. He nodded, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. It's my pleasure, Lear. Welcome to Oakhaven. He led her up the winding staircase, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the dim light. The house was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, each creak and groan telling tales of centuries past. Her senses were heightened, acutely aware of his presence just ahead of her, the subtle scent of wood smoke and damp earth clinging to him, the soft pad of his footsteps, the sheer breadth of his shoulders just inches from her. He stopped at a door at the end of the hall, pushing it open. This was Evelyn's room, he said, stepping aside to let her enter. The room was spacious, with a large four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet. A smaller fireplace, cold but inviting, sat against one wall. The window overlooked the rain-swept garden, and even in the dim light, Ilara could see the vague shapes of ancient rose bushes. It felt, despite Evelyn's eccentricities, like a sanctuary. It's beautiful, she breathed, walking further into the room. There are extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. If you get cold, Rhys said from the doorway. His voice, lower now, seemed to wrap around her. And the bathroom is just across the hall, the first door on the right. She turned to face him, the soft light from the hallway casting his features in shadow, making him seem even more mysterious, more elemental. Thank you, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The air between them was thick, charged with an unspoken electricity. Her heart began to beat a little faster. He stood there for a moment longer, his gaze fixed on hers, searching, probing. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of the house and the beating of her own pulse. She felt a magnetic pull, an undeniable current that made her want to step closer, to bridge the distance between them. His eyes, those deep, fathomless grey eyes, held a question, a silent invitation that resonated deep within her. Sleep well, Ilara, he finally said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to caress her name. You too, Rhys, she replied, her voice breathy, her gaze still locked with his. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, and then, with a final lingering look that felt like a touch, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. Ilara stood in the center of the room, listening until the last echo of his presence dissolved into the silence. The storm still raged outside, but inside a new kind of storm had begun to gather. She closed the door, her hand lingering on the cool wood. The room was cold, yet her skin felt flushed, a warmth blooming low in her belly. She moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The rain had picked up again, lashing against the glass. The ancient trees swayed like silent dancers, their branches reaching, grasping. She thought of Rhys, of his steady gaze, his quiet strength, the subtle current that had flowed between them. This wasn't the solitude she had imagined. This was something far more potent, far more dangerous. And as she finally moved to unpack her small bag, the faint scent of wood smoke and a man's presence seemed to linger in the very air of the room, a whispered promise of the night ahead. Elara sat her small leather satchel on the rustic wooden bench beneath the window, its worn surface cool beneath her fingertip. The room was simple, yet imbued with a profound sense of history and quiet comfort. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a stack of split logs waiting patiently beside it. A sturdy table with 2 chairs stood in the center, and in the corner a narrow wrought-iron bed was draped with a thick hand-stitched quilt, promising warmth against the mountain chill. She unlatched the satchel, the soft rasp of leather echoing in the stillness. Her few clothes, a worn journal, a book of poetry, all seemed woefully inadequate for the storm gathering outside, and for the storm she felt brewing within her. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, but beneath it, that elusive, tantalizing hint of wood smoke, and something distinctly masculine persisted. It was subtle, like a memory that just wouldn't quite surface, yet potent enough to prickle her skin with an unexpected awareness. She moved to the window again, pressing her palm flat against the cold glass. The world outside was a shifting tapestry of gray and green, the forest a dark, impenetrable wall. The wind had picked up, a mournful howl that tugged at the eaves, and the rain, relentless since her arrival, now lashed with greater fury, obscuring the already fading light. It was a wild, untamed beauty, mirroring the thrumming anticipation in her own veins. Rhys. The name was a silent whisper on her lips. She hadn't seen him in years, not since that brief, intense summer they'd spent working on a conservation project together, before life had pulled them onto different paths. Yet the memory of his presence, his quiet intensity, had never quite faded. He had been the one to offer her this cabin, a secluded sanctuary for her writing, tucked deep in the ancestral lands of his family, high in the mountains. "It's just what you need, Elara," he'd said over the phone, his voice a low rumble that had sent an immediate shiver down her spine. Solitude, peace, and the raw beauty of the wilderness. He'd neglected to mention that the wilderness might include him. A sudden sharp rap on the door made her jump, her heart leaping into her throat. It was a sound both startling and deeply anticipated. She turned slowly, her breath catching. The door, heavy and dark, seemed to vibrate with the force of the knock. "Elara," his voice. Deeper than she remembered, a rich baritone that resonated through the thick timber. It was like a chord struck in the quiet of the room, awakening something dormant within her. She took a steadying breath, her hand smoothing down the front of her simple wool dress. "Come in, Rhys," she called, her own voice sounding surprisingly steady. The door swung open, revealing him framed against the stormy twilight. He was taller, broader than she recalled, his shoulders filling the doorway. Rain slicked his dark hair, clinging to the rugged stubble that shadowed his jaw. His eyes, the color of deep moss, held that same piercing, intelligent gaze she remembered, but now there was a new depth, a hint of something unreadable, yet undeniably captivating. He wore a heavy, dark canvas jacket, damp at the shoulders, and sturdy work boots. He looked like he belonged to the wild, a part of the ancient forest itself. A gust of wind swept in with him, carrying the scent of rain, pine, and him. It was a potent, intoxicating mix that swirled around her, making her dizzy. "I thought I heard you arrive," he said, his voice a low murmur, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering for a fraction longer on her lips than strictly necessary before meeting her eyes. "Didn't want you to be without a fire on a night like this." He gestured to the hearth. "It'll get cold fast." "Thank you, Rhys," she managed, her voice a little breathy. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a ridiculous response to a simple courtesy, but his presence was anything but simple. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, with a soft thud that sealed them both within the cabin's embrace. The outside world momentarily forgotten. He moved with a quiet grace that belied his size, crossing the room to the fireplace. He knelt, his movements economical, reaching for the kindling head clearly laid out earlier. The subtle flexing of the muscles beneath his damp jacket was a silent poetry that Alara found herself watching with a fascinated intensity. Sparks flew as he struck a match, the small flame flaring bright in the dimming light. He coaxed it gently, the dry tinder catching with a soft crackle. Soon a small blaze began to dance, casting flickering shadows across the rough-hewn walls, and more importantly, across Reese's profile. The warmth began to spread, chasing away the chill and subtly warming the air between them. "You found it all right?" he asked, not looking at her, his attention focused on the burgeoning fire. "Yes. The directions were perfect," she replied, finding her voice more easily now that he wasn't directly looking at her. "It's beautiful, Reese. More than I imagined." He finally looked up, his eyes catching the firelight, glinting like polished stones. "It has its own kind of beauty, I suppose. It's been in my family for generations. My grandfather built this place." His gaze softened, a hint of tenderness in their depths. "He would have liked you, Alara. He always appreciated a woman with a keen mind and an independent spirit." His words, a simple compliment, felt like a caress. She felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the growing fire. "That's high praise," she said, offering him a small, genuine smile. He rose, dusting his hands on his trousers, and moved towards the small kitchen area, a nook tucked into one corner of the cabin. "I brought some supplies," he said, his voice a little gruffer now, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Didn't know what you'd have, or if you'd had time to stop in the village." He opened a canvas bag he'd brought in with him, revealing a bottle of dark red wine, a loaf of crusty bread, some cheese and a small pot of stew. "Thought you might be hungry." "Reese, you didn't have to," she began, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. He merely shrugged, turning to light the small oil lamp on the table. The soft glow pushed back the encroaching shadows, illuminating the small cabin with a warm, inviting radiance. "It's no trouble. I was coming up this way anyway. Besides," he paused, turning to face her fully, a faint smile playing on his lips, "I knew you wouldn't say no to my mother's venison stew." She laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that surprised even herself. "You know me too well." His mother's stew was legendary. It was one of the many things she remembered fondly from that summer: shared meals with his family, the easy camaraderie, the way Reese had always sought her out, his quiet presence a constant comfort. He began to set the table, laying out 2 simple plates and mugs. The domesticity of the scene, the two of them in this isolated cabin, preparing to share a meal as the storm raged outside, felt profoundly intimate. She found herself watching his hands as he uncorked the wine, strong and capable, the fingers long and calloused. A sudden, vivid memory flashed through her mind. His hands guiding hers as they'd learned to tie a complex knot. The accidental brush of skin, the spark that had ignited between them, silent and undeniable. "Can I help?" she asked, stepping forward, eager to break the spell of her own thoughts. "You can pour the wine," he suggested, handing her the bottle. Their fingers brushed as she took it, a jolt, quick and electric, passing between them. He didn't pull away immediately, his gaze holding hers for a beat too long, and in that shared glance, the unspoken currents between them surged to the surface, raw and undeniable. She poured the dark liquid into the 2 mugs, her hand trembling slightly. The rich aroma of berries and spice filled the air. She handed him one, their fingers brushing again, this time with a conscious linger. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim of the mug. "Good vintage," he commented, his voice a low rumble. "It is," she agreed, taking a tentative sip of her own. The warmth of the wine spread through her, loosening the tightness in her chest. They settled at the table, the small fire crackling merrily in the hearth, The only other sound the persistent drumming of rain against the roof and windows. He dished out the stew, its rich, gamey scent mingling with the wood smoke and wine. The bread was torn, not sliced, and the cheese was a sharp, earthy cheddar. It was a simple meal, but in that moment it felt like a feast. They ate mostly in comfortable silence, punctuated by the storm's fury. Ilara found herself stealing glances at Rhys across the flickering lamplight. His dark hair was beginning to dry, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. There was a quiet intensity about him that was deeply alluring. He wasn't overtly charismatic, but his presence was a gravitational pull she found impossible to resist. "So," he finally said, setting down his mug, "what brings you back to the wilderness, Ilara? Last I heard, you were thriving in the city, publishing articles, making a name for yourself." She smiled a little wistfully. "I was. But the city, it started to feel confining. The noise, the constant rush. I missed the quiet, the space to think, to breathe." And she hesitated. "I felt a story brewing, one that needed the wild to be told." She looked around the cabin. "This place feels like it holds 1,000 stories." His gaze searched hers, discerning. "It does. And you're the one to find them, aren't you?" His voice was soft, laced with an understanding that made her heart ache. He always seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade, straight to the truth of her. "Perhaps," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "What about you, Rhys? Still working with the Forest Service?" He nodded. "Mostly. I run the family land now, too. My father retired last year." He gestured vaguely to the window. "There's always work to be done. The forest, she's a demanding mistress." A faint smile touched his lips. "But a rewarding one." They talked then, the conversation flowing more easily now that the initial awkwardness had dissipated. They spoke of the forest, of changes in the world, of memories from that summer long ago, circling around the edges of the unspoken. The thing that had always been between them. His voice was a soothing balm, deep and resonant, and she found herself captivated by the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled. The wine was a gentle warmth in her belly, blurring the edges of her apprehension. She felt herself relax, a sense of ease settling over her that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. It was the ease of being understood, of being seen. "I need to check on the traps," Rhys said, pushing back his chair after a while, the practical words a sudden jolt after the intimacy of their conversation. "And I should let you get some rest. It's been a long day for you." A pang of disappointment shot through her, sharp and unexpected. She didn't want him to leave. Not yet. "Wait," she said, before she could think better of it. "It's still pouring out there, and it's lonely in here with just the storm for company." She felt her cheeks flush, but she met his gaze squarely. Could you stay a little longer? Just until the rain eases." His eyes, dark and unreadable, searched hers for a long moment. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "I suppose I could," he said, his voice a low drawl that sent a shiver down her spine. He settled back into his chair, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in their dynamic. The unspoken invitation hung heavy in the air, a delicate thread woven between them. He reached for the half-empty wine bottle, topping up their mugs. "Tell me, Ilara," he began, his voice softer now. "What is this story you're chasing?" She hesitated, then found herself speaking freely, pouring out her thoughts about the ancient spirits of the forest, the forgotten legends, the intertwining of human lives with the wild. She spoke with passion, her hands gesturing, her eyes alight. He listened intently, his gaze unwavering, and she felt herself drawn deeper into the orbit of his attention. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, just listened, a quiet anchor in the swirling currents of her words. As she spoke, the storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling louder, rattling the windows. The cabin, however, felt increasingly warm and safe, a small island of light and intimacy in the vast, dark wilderness. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing up the chimney, its warmth seeping into Alara's bones. When she finally paused, her voice a little hoarse, he reached across the table, his fingers gently covering hers. His touch was warm, firm, and sent a jolt of pure sensation through her arm, up to her shoulder, and directly to her heart. She didn't pull away. Couldn't. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "The pulse of it all. This land, it has a way of getting under your skin, of revealing truths you didn't know you were hiding." Her breath hitched. His eyes, dark and fathomless, were locked on hers, and in their depths, she saw a reflection of her own longing, her own unspoken desires. The romantic tension between them had reached a palpable peak, thrumming in the very air. "I too," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I feel it, Reese. All of it." He leaned closer, his scent, wood smoke, rain, and that unique, intoxicating scent of him, enveloping her. Her senses reeled. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat. He was so close, she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, see the tiny flecks of gold in the green of his eyes. "And what truth is it revealing to you, Alara?" he asked, his voice a low, husky whisper, his gaze dropping to her lips. Her own lips parted slightly, a silent invitation. She could taste the wine on her tongue, feel the heat rising in her cheeks. The air between them crackled with an electric energy, a promise of something profound and inevitable. She wanted to tell him everything, every truth her heart held, every desire that had awakened since he walked through her door. But no words were necessary. Her eyes, wide and searching, spoke volumes. He moved then, slowly, deliberately, shifting his chair closer until their knees brushed beneath the table. The contact was an exquisite torture, a spark that ignited a deeper fire within her. His hand tightened on hers, his thumb still stroking, sending delicious shivers through her. He leaned in further, his breath warm on her cheek, smelling faintly of wine and something undeniably primal. Her eyelids fluttered, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She could feel the whisper of his stubble against her skin, the warmth of his proximity. Every nerve ending in her body was alive, humming with anticipation. The storm outside raged, a furious symphony of wind and rain, but within the cabin, time seemed to slow, to stretch, held captive by the magnetic pull between them. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, his gaze, heavy with unspoken desire, traveled from her eyes, down the bridge of her nose, to the curve of her mouth. He paused there, his eyes lingering as if savoring the moment, prolonging the exquisite agony of anticipation. His thumb, still stroking her hand, moved to her wrist, finding the pulse point there, a frantic flutter beneath his touch. "Alara," he breathed. Her name a prayer, a question, a promise. She tilted her head back slightly, offering herself her vulnerability to him. Her fingers twined with his, clinging as if to a lifeline. The hunger in his eyes was a reflection of her own, a deep primal yearning that had been stirring within her for years, only now fully awakened by his presence. The firelight danced, painting their faces in shades of amber and shadow, making the moment feel ancient, timeless. The rain outside hammered like a desperate heartbeat, mirroring the frantic rhythm of her own. She felt an intoxicating blend of fear and exhilaration, a sense of standing on the precipice of something vast and overwhelming. He finally moved, his head dipping, his lips brushing hers, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt through her entire being. It was a mere whisper of a kiss, a testing, an inquiry. Her own lips parted in response, inviting him deeper. She longed for the full press of his mouth, the taste of him, the complete surrender to the passion that flared so brightly between them. But he pulled back slightly, his gaze still holding hers, a challenging glint in his eyes. "Are you sure, Alara?" he murmured, his voice husky, laced with a raw emotion that thrilled her to her core. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back." Her heart throbbed, a wild, untamed thing. She met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm sure, Race," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, but her conviction clear. "I've been waiting for this line to be crossed for a very long time." A slow smile, dangerously sensual, spread across his face. He leaned in again, this time with purpose, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. His touch was both tender and firm, possessing. His lips descended, claiming hers fully, completely. It was a kiss that tasted of wine and longing, of wood smoke and rain, of years of unspoken desire finally unleashed. Her body arched into his, a desperate need blooming deep within her. She closed her eyes, giving herself over to the intoxicating sensation, to the warmth and strength of him. His mouth moved over hers with a practiced, passionate skill, coaxing, demanding, promising. She felt herself melt, her bones turning to liquid. His hand left her jaw, trailing down her neck, over her shoulder, and then to her waist, pulling her closer until her side pressed against his. She could feel the hard plane of his chest against her arm, the solid muscle beneath her fingers, as she instinctively reached out, her hand finding purchase on his shoulder. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more insistent. His tongue tentatively explored the seam of her lips, and she opened for him, allowing him full access. Their tongues met, tangled, a sensual dance that sent shivers of pure pleasure cascading through her. She moaned softly into his mouth, a sound of profound satisfaction and burgeoning need. He broke the kiss reluctantly, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing heavily. His eyes, dark with desire, searched hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Me too," she admitted, her voice equally breathless. Her fingers tangled in his damp hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him fractionally closer. She wanted more. All of him. He lifted his head, a thoughtful expression on his face. The storm outside seemed to mock their internal calm, reminding them of the wildness surrounding them, and the wildness within. He reached for her other hand, bringing it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, then turning her palm over and kissing the sensitive skin there. It was a gesture of profound tenderness that made her heart swell. "This is not a night for leaving," he murmured, his eyes holding hers, full of meaning. "Not for either of us." Her gaze dropped to his lips, still swollen from their kiss, then back to his eyes. She didn't need words to understand his unspoken question, his silent plea. Her answer was in the way she leaned into his touch, the way her body yearned for his. He rose slowly, drawing her up with him. Her dress, simple and unfussy, was suddenly too restrictive, too much fabric between them. He didn't release her hand, but instead led her away from the table, away from the flickering lamplight, towards the soft glow of the fire. The air grew warmer as they approached the hearth, the dancing flames casting long, sinuous shadows that played across their bodies. He stopped before the fire, turning to face her fully, his hands still holding hers, his thumbs stroking the back of her hands. The roar of the wind outside seemed to fade, replaced by the steady thrum of her own pulse. His gaze was intense, burning, stripping away her inhibitions, leaving her feeling exquisitely vulnerable and utterly desired. "Are you warm enough now, Elara?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Almost," she replied, her voice barely a breath. The heat of the fire was nothing compared to the heat that radiated from his body, the heat that had ignited within her. He smiled then, a slow, knowing curve of his lips that sent a fresh wave of desire through her. He released one of her hands, reaching out to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, then brushing over her lower lip, sending shivers through her. His touch was light yet profoundly sensual, awakening every nerve. "Let's get you truly warm then," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers, full of promise. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "I've waited a long time for this, Elara. We both have." And with that, he bent, sweeping her into his arms with an effortless strength that left her breathless. She gasped, a small sound of surprise and delight, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. He held her close against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder, and she could feel the powerful beat of his heart against her ear, a steady, comforting rhythm that mingled with the wild thrum of her own. He carried her across the room, the scent of him, of wood smoke and pine, and rain-kissed man, filling her senses, intoxicating her. Her fingers found the dampness of his hair, the strong column of his neck, exploring the contours of him. She buried her face into his shoulder, breathing him in, completely lost in the moment. He reached the narrow wrought iron bed, draped with its thick hand-stitched quilt. He lowered her gently onto the bed, his gaze never breaking from hers. She lay back against the soft quilt, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. He knelt beside the bed, his strong frame looming over her, a silhouette against the flickering firelight. "You are even more beautiful than I remembered," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, then drifting down her neck, pausing at the pulse point, throbbing wildly at her collarbone. She felt the blush spread across her chest, a delicious warmth. "And you, Reese," she whispered back, her voice husky. "You are exactly as I remembered. And so much more." He leaned in, his gaze burning into hers, the unspoken desire between them a tangible thing. He didn't rush, not now, but savored the moment, the anticipation, the slow, deliberate unfolding of their shared longing. The storm outside continued its furious dance, but within the cabin, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of passion and profound connection, ready to break. The air crackled with unspoken promises, with the heady scent of desire, and the quiet potent magic of a night that had just begun. He was so close now, she could feel the warmth of his body, the brush of his breath against her lips, the overwhelming pull of his presence. This was not merely the solitude she had sought. This was a sanctuary of the heart, found in the wild embrace of a man who saw her, truly saw her, and desired her with an intensity that matched her own. The night stretched before them, long and full of promise. A canvas waiting for their shared story to unfold. He lowered himself onto the bed beside her, his weight settling the mattress, but not truly taking his eyes from hers. He propped himself on one elbow, his other hand coming up to gently thread through her hair, letting the soft strands sift through his fingers. The raw, primal hunger that had been simmering between them was now an open flame, dancing in his moss-green eyes. "That dress," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against the background symphony of the storm. "It hides too much." Her breath hitched again, a tiny sound of pure anticipation. The wool, which had felt comforting moments ago, now felt like a barrier, a cruel impediment. Her gaze, wide and expectant, locked with his, giving him silent permission. He didn't move quickly, but with a deliberate, almost reverent slowness that heightened every sensation. His fingers, calloused from work, brushed against the delicate fabric of her dress at her shoulder, tracing the line of the collarbone. The simple garment had a row of small wooden buttons running down the front. His thumb found the first button, then the second. Each unfastening was a tiny explosion of sensation, sending shivers through her skin. She watched his face, mesmerized. His brows were slightly furrowed in concentration, his lips parted just a fraction. He wasn't just undressing her, he was unveiling her, piece by exquisite piece, with an intensity that made her feel utterly cherished and profoundly desired. The firelight flickered, painting his strong features in chiaroscuro, making him seem both ancient and utterly present. As he undid the third button, her eyes fluttered shut, a soft moan escaping her throat. The cool night air, in stark contrast to the growing heat between them, brushed against her skin. She felt a delicious vulnerability, an eager surrender. When he had undone enough buttons to free her, he paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in the swell of her breasts beneath the simple chemise she wore beneath the dress. A faint flush rose to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Instead, she met his gaze, her own eyes alight with a reciprocal hunger. "You are perfection, Ilara," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. He leaned down, not to kiss her lips again, but to press a soft, lingering kiss to the exposed skin of her shoulder, just where the dress had fallen open. His lips were warm, soft, and the sensation was a spark that ignited a deeper fire within her. He then gently nudged the wool fabric from her shoulders, letting it pool around her waist. The simple camise, made of soft linen, was all that remained, its thin straps framing the delicate curve of her collarbones. He reached for the straps, his fingers brushing against her skin as he slid them down her arms, allowing the chemise to follow the dress, leaving her exposed to the waist. The cool air of the cabin met her skin, but it was quickly chased away by the heat that radiated from Reese and the inferno building within her. She lay there, bare to the waist, her breasts rising and falling with her quickened breath. His eyes devoured her, a silent worship that made her feel beautiful, powerful. He leaned in again, his lips finding the hollow of her throat, pressing soft, tantalizing kisses there. She arched her back, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, urging him closer. His kisses trailed lower, to the delicate skin just above her collarbone, then to the soft swell of her breast. He kissed the valley between them, then moved to the peak, his lips brushing over the tip, sending a jolt of pure pleasure through her. A soft gasp escaped her lips as his mouth finally, gently, closed over one sensitive nipple. It was a soft suckle, a tentative tease, that made her entire body tremble. She whimpered, her hands gripping his shoulders, her fingers digging into the firm muscle. He continued his gentle ministrations, and she felt an exquisite warmth spread through her, pooling low in her belly. He lifted his head, his eyes dark with a passion that mirrored her own. "You taste like honey and wildness, Alara," he whispered, his voice thick and raw. "Just as I remembered." He then moved lower, his hands reaching for the hem of her skirt. He untied the simple drawstring, and with the same deliberate slowness, he slid the fabric down her legs, over her hips, until it joined the rest of her clothes at the foot of the bed. She wore nothing beneath, her skin now completely exposed to his gaze, to the flickering firelight, to the charged air between them. She felt a frisson of shyness, quickly overtaken by a profound sense of liberation. She was utterly vulnerable, completely open to him, and in his eyes she saw only adoration, not judgment. He shed his own clothes with less ceremony, his eyes never leaving hers. His jacket, then his shirt, revealing the broad muscled expanse of his chest, dusted with dark hair. His body was lean and powerful, sculpted by years of working in the wild. The firelight played across his skin, highlighting the definition of his muscles, the strong line of his collarbones. He was magnificent, a primal force of nature. He kicked off his boots, then removed his trousers, revealing his long, powerful legs, and the hard, undeniable evidence of his desire for her. Her gaze lingered there for a moment, a wave of heat washing over her. Then he was beside her again, fully naked, his warm skin pressing against hers. The contact was electric, a rush of pure sensation that made her gasp. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close, reveling in the feel of his hard body against her soft curves. His scent, now unhindered by clothing, enveloped her completely. It was intoxicating, a musk of man and earth and desire. His lips found hers again, this time with a deep, hungry passion that left no room for thought, only sensation. Their bodies tangled, legs entwined, hands exploring, rediscovering, paw. His fingers threaded through hair, cupping the back of her head, holding her captive in the kiss. Her hands roamed over his back, feeling the ridges of his spine, the smooth expanse of his skin, the tautness of his muscles. He shifted, rising slightly above her, supporting himself on his forearms, his gaze burning into hers. "Alara," he breathed, his voice raw with need. "Are you ready?" Her answer was a silent nod, her eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears of pure emotion. She reached up, pulling his head down, claiming his mouth once more. This was not just physical. It was a reunion of souls, a culmination of years of unspoken longing, a journey into the wild heart of desire. The storm outside raged, a powerful chorus to the tempest brewing within them, a night of elemental passion that was only just beginning. The kiss deepened, a swirling vortex of taste and sensation. His hands, no longer tentative, found purchase at the small of her back, pressing her hips flush against his, leaving no doubt as to the fierce hunger that had taken root in him. Lara's fingers tangled in his dark hair, pulling gently, a soft moan escaping her lips as his mouth moved from hers, trailing a searing path along her jawline, down the column of her throat. Each touch was a spark, igniting a wildfire within her, burning away years of unspoken desires, of guarded emotions. "Lara," he murmured against her skin, the vibration of his voice sending shivers through her. "My beautiful Lara." She arched into him, her body aching for closer contact, for the complete obliteration of any space between them. The crisp fabric of his shirt, the soft silk of her dress, suddenly felt like an unbearable barrier, an impediment to the raw, urgent need that now consumed them both. With a shared, unspoken understanding, their hands moved, fumbling with buttons and zippers, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm outside seemed to crescendo with their mounting desire, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling like a primal beast. He peeled the elegant silk from her shoulders, letting it drift to the floor like a discarded cloud, revealing the pale curve of her collarbone, the delicate swell of her breasts. Lara shivered, not from cold, but from the heat of his gaze, the reverence in his eyes as he took her in. Her own hands, trembling slightly, worked at the buttons of his shirt, releasing the taut muscles of his chest, the warmth of his skin. When it, too, fell away, she reached out, her fingertips tracing the lean contours of his torso, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. A soft gasp escaped her as he drew her close again, their bare chests meeting, skin to skin, a shock of pure sensation that stole her breath. The scent of him, rain and pine and something uniquely within him, filled her senses, intoxicating her. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her towards the flickering warmth of the hearth, towards the plush rug spread before the roaring fire. The embers cast dancing shadows across their bodies as he gently lowered her, kneeling before her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are exquisite," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, as he began to shed the rest of her clothing, each piece removed with a slow, deliberate grace that was both agonizing and exquisite. The lace of her bra, the silk of her panties, each item was an offering, a surrender. When she lay before him, bathed in the golden glow of the firelight, completely vulnerable and utterly beautiful, he paused, his gaze drinking her in, a silent promise in his dark eyes. Lara watched him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She reached for him, a silent plea, and he understood. He shed his own remaining clothes with a swiftness born of urgent desire, revealing the powerful lines of his body, the masculine beauty that had haunted her dreams for so long. He was magnificent, a god carved from shadow and fire, and she felt a tremor of awe, mixed with an undeniable yearning. He joined her on the rug, his body warm and solid against hers. The rough wool of the rug provided a pleasant contrast to the softness of her skin as he leaned over her, supporting himself on his elbows, gazing down at her with an intensity that made her entire being thrum. He kissed her then, a deep, consuming kiss that tasted of longing and release, of promises kept and futures forged. His hand, warm and strong, moved along her side, tracing the curve of her hip, then venturing higher, over her ribs, until his thumb brushed lightly against the peak of her breast. A gasp tore from her throat, and she arched into his touch, her body singing under the exquisite pressure. He took her cue, his fingers gently circling, teasing, bringing her to a fever pitch of sensation. The storm outside raged, but here, in the cocoon of firelight and shared passion, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of elemental desire, of two souls finally finding their way home. He kissed her neck, her shoulder, the soft hollow at the base of her throat, each touch, each brush of his lips sending tendrils of pure pleasure through her. His leg moved between hers, a soft, intimate pressure that made her hips instinctively lift, seeking more. She could feel his heart hammering against her, mirroring the frantic beat of her own. "Lara," he breathed again, his voice a low rumble against her ear, his lips brushing the sensitive skin there. "I've dreamed of this, of you." Her answer was a soft whimper, a wordless invitation. He moved slowly, deliberately, his body pressing down, aligning with hers. She felt the gentle, insistent nudge, the promise of fullness, of completion. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his, and she saw not just desire, but a profound tenderness, a deep, abiding love that transcended the physical. He entered her with a slowness that was both agonizing and incredibly sensual, a deep, gradual filling that stretched and molded her, making her cry out softly. It was a sensation of utter belonging, of two halves finally becoming whole. Tears, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy and release, welled in her eyes, blurring his face through a shimmering veil. She gripped his shoulders, her nails digging gently into his strong muscles, anchoring herself to him as he began to move. A slow, deliberate rhythm that quickly picked up pace, mirroring the storm outside, the rising tide within them. Each thrust was a declaration, each retreat a building of anticipation. She met him, thrust for thrust, her hips rising instinctively to meet his, their bodies moving in a timeless dance, a primal rhythm that spoke of creation and connection. The firelight flickering, casting their entwined forms in shades of gold and amber, their shadows dancing wildly on the cabin walls, a silent testament to their unfolding passion. Her mind emptied of everything but the sensation of him, of their bodies melding, of the exquisite pressure building, a wave about to break. He watched her, his gaze locked with hers, a silent communication passing between them, a shared journey towards the precipice. Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat as the pressure intensified, becoming almost unbearable, yet utterly thrilling. "Look at me, Lara," he urged, his voice strained, raw with his own nearing release. "Stay with me." She did, her eyes wide, glistening, reflecting the firelight and the fierce emotion in his own. And then with a final, desperate surge, the wave broke. A cry tore from her lips, wild and uninhibited, as pure, unadulterated pleasure rocketed through her, shaking her to her core. Her body convulsed around him, clinging, shattering, dissolving into a million dazzling fragments of light and sensation. He followed swiftly, a deep groan rumbling from his chest as he poured himself into her, his body trembling, his head falling to her shoulder. His breath hot against her ear. For long moments, they lay entwined, their bodies slick with sweat, their breathing ragged, the only sounds the dying embers of the fire, the distant rumble of thunder, and the frantic beat of their hearts, slowly returning to a calmer rhythm. The storm outside began to recede, as if in deference to the tempest that had just passed within the cabin walls. He shifted slightly, rising onto an elbow, looking down at her, his eyes still dark with passion, but now softened with tenderness. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead, his touch infinitely gentle. "Lara," he whispered, his voice still hoarse. "My Lara." She reached up, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, the slight stubble there. A soft, contented sigh escaped her. "Julian," she murmured, the sound of his name on her lips feeling new and profoundly right. That was everything. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. More than everything, it was coming home. They lay there, simply holding each other, allowing the afterglow to wash over them, a warm, golden haze of peace and contentment. The fire crackled, casting its warm glow, and the silence that settled between them was not empty, but full, brimming with unspoken understanding, with years of shared history and a lifetime of future promises. Eventually, Julian stirred, pulling a thick, soft blanket from the foot of the bed, and wrapping it around them both, drawing her closer into the warmth of his embrace. They moved from the rug to the bed, bodies still entwined, finding comfort in the soft mattress and the secure knowledge of each other's presence. He held her tightly, her head nestled against his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady, reassuring beat. I never imagined this night would truly come, Lara confessed, her voice a sleepy whisper, tinged with wonder. Julian tightened his hold. Nor I, but I always hoped. Every single day, I hoped. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You were worth every moment of waiting, every silent prayer. A comfortable quiet descended, broken only by the gentle rhythm of their breathing, and the occasional distant rumble of thunder, as the storm finally retreated to the horizon. Lara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a deep, bone-deep contentment she hadn't realized she was missing until this moment. She was safe, loved, and utterly cherished. She drifted off to sleep, curled against him, the scent of his skin, the warmth of his body, and the steady beat of his heart her lullaby. It was the most profound sleep she had known in years, a sleep free from restlessness, from the gnawing ache of unfulfilled desire. Yes. Lara woke slowly, sunlight filtering through the gaps in the curtains, painting stripes of gold across the room. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the clean scent of rain-washed earth and pine. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world reborn. She blinked, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything. A soft smile touched her lips as she realized she was still nestled against Julian, his arm a warm, heavy weight across her waist, his steady breathing a gentle rhythm beside her ear. His hair was tousled, his face relaxed in sleep, a faint stubble darkening his jaw. He looked utterly peaceful, utterly hers. Carefully, so as not to wake him, she turned in his arms, propping herself up on an elbow to study him. The morning light softened the strong lines of his face, revealing a vulnerability she found incredibly endearing. She reached out, her fingertips tracing the curve of his brow, the faint scar above his eye, the gentle slope of his nose. He stirred, a low rumble escaping his throat, and his eyes fluttered open, dark and heavy-lidded. A slow smile spread across his face as he saw her, a smile that reached his eyes and filled them with warmth. Good morning, sleepyhead, he murmured, his voice husky with sleep and tenderness. Good morning, she replied, her voice a little breathy. She leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to his lips. It was a kiss of dawn, of new beginnings, of a love that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent. Stay right here, he mumbled, his voice muffled. Forever? Lara laughed softly, a sound of pure joy. I think I could arrange that. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, simply basking in each other's presence, the quiet intimacy of the morning, a tender counterpoint to the wild passion of the night. Eventually, the growl of Julian's stomach broke the spell, and he chuckled. Breakfast? He suggested, his eyes twinkling. I'm starving. Starving is an understatement, Lara agreed, stretching languidly, her body still humming with a delicious ache. They rose, moving around the cabin with a newfound ease, a comfortable synchronicity that spoke of years of unspoken understanding, now finally given voice. Julian pulled on a pair of soft sweatpants, his bare chest still magnificent in the morning light. Lara found one of his shirts, a soft flannel, and pulled it on. It hung loosely on her, smelling faintly of him, enveloping her in a comforting warmth. He started the coffee, the rich aroma filling the cabin, while she found eggs and bacon in the small refrigerator. They moved around each other in the compact kitchen, brushing hands, exchanging soft smiles, a silent language of love unfolding between them. The simple act of making breakfast together felt profound, a domestic ritual imbued with the weight of their shared history and their blossoming future. As they sat at the small wooden table, steam rising from their coffee mugs, the golden sunlight streaming through the window, Lara looked at Julian across the table. His gaze met hers, full of a quiet intensity, a deep, unwavering love. This feels right, she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. It is right, he affirmed, reaching across the table to take her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. More right than anything has ever felt before. He squeezed her hand gently. We've wasted too much time, Lara. I don't want to waste another moment. Her heart swelled with emotion. Neither do I. He smiled, a genuine radiant smile that made her heart flutter. So what do you say? Shall we start building that future we've both been dreaming of, right here? His eyes swept around the cozy cabin, then back to her, full of hope and promise. Lara's eyes, still shimmering with unshed tears of happiness, met his. This wasn't just about a night of passion, it was about a lifetime. It was about finding the courage to open their hearts, to shed their fears, and to embrace the love that had always been simmering beneath the surface. Yes, she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Oh yes, Julian, let's. The morning sun, now fully risen, bathed the cabin in a golden glow, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the warmth of the fire, and the two souls, finally united, ready to embark on a beautiful shared journey. Their elemental passion, a fierce and tender flame, now forever burning bright. The storm had passed, but the love it had ignited would last an eternity.